Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we're going to be in the book of Ruth. We're talking about Boaz, one of the guys in there. He's one of the two main characters in the book of Ruth, that being Ruth and Boaz. Naomi is also the third main character. We're going to talk less about her. I have a lot less nice things to say about her. We'll deal with that at a different point in time. For now, we're going to be in the book of Ruth. We're going to kind of take some piecemeal verses throughout. Boaz primarily features in chapters 2, 3, and then a bit of 4 as well. We're going to read sections from 2 and 3, or take verses from 2 and 3, and then reference the idea in chapter 4, but not really get into that too deeply. This is not going to be a study of Ruth. We can do that at a different point in time. This is instead just a sermon trying to give you an overview of Boaz as a person, because as you see the title, something along the lines of Boaz, the man like God. Boaz himself is actually this really good representation of who God is and how God interacts with his people. We know from the beginning, from Genesis chapter 1, that God created man in his image, is what he says. We are to look like him. We're to emulate him. We're supposed to live like him. We're supposed to act like him. We're just supposed to be like him. And good and righteous people, those who emulate God, it shows, and you can start to see God shining through the actions of people around you. Well, Ruth, as much as the book of Ruth is this bright spot in the middle of the horrific Judges period, and as much as the character of Ruth is this bright spot as she represents what it means to be a seeker of God, Boaz is this bright spot in history that represents what God looks like to people. And Ruth and Boaz, and examining their relationship, actually gives you a pretty good picture of how God interacts with the people who are seeking him and coming to him and just asking for help. So, picture of Boaz is, as you look at Boaz, there are about 7 different things that you can see Boaz doing that might help you to see who God is, especially as he works and interacts with people. This is more of maybe a character study. Some might say this is kind of a topical sermon on Boaz instead of being on any particular passage, and maybe that's true. I'm not very good at topical sermons, so if this goes poorly, oh well, I expect it. Boaz, as you look at him, he's got seven different key points and features to him. Let's start with number 1, which is found in Ruth chapter 2, starting in verse 4. If you know the story of Ruth, Ruth is a Moabitess. She comes from Moab. She's a foreigner. Her mother-in-law, let's go back to the very beginning. Naomi and her husband move from Israel to Moab during a time of famine and some of the other oppression that's going on in the Judges. Instead of having faith in God and staying in the land of Israel, they move away from the land of Israel with their 2 sons. While they're in the land of Moab, their 2 sons marry 2 of the Moabite women, that being Ruth and Orpah. And unfortunately, Naomi's husband dies, and Ruth and Orpah's husbands both die. So Naomi then just gives up on the land of Moab. As soon as she hears that Israel has food again, well, she's lost everything over here, and she moves back to Israel. Orpah threatens to come with her, but then immediately doesn't as soon as she's told not to. It's almost like she was looking for an excuse not to go, and Naomi said, "Don't come." So she said, "Oh, well, okay." Ruth, on the other hand, volunteers to go back. Naomi says, "No, I don't want you to come." And Ruth says, quite frankly, I don't really care. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. In other words, I'm following after you whether you like it or not. I'm going to be an Israelite too. Ruth doesn't really know what that means. And so Ruth is going on a journey of discovery on what the land of Israel is and who the God of Israel is. And she's a fascinating character to study from her own perspective, or by her own right, because she's trying to figure out how to fit in and like, who is God and how can I work with him and what exactly does that mean? So she's interesting to examine, but she ends up working. She comes back over. They're 2 random women. They don't have any money. They don't have any provision. So Ruth ends up working to sustain both of them, and she goes to pick grain in a field to bring the grain home to make some flour, make some bread, and survive off of that. And that's when she ends up in the field of a very nice man named Boaz. Here we are introduced to Boaz in the very beginning of Ruth 2. Naomi has this relative of her husband, a man of great wealth in the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth says, let me go out in the field and glean among the ears of grain, and following one in whose eyes I might find favor. And so she goes out in verse 3. And she ends up happening to just kind of accidentally shift over into the field of Boaz. And in the field of Boaz, he comes out. And he's pretty cool. Here's what he says. The first thing that you notice about Boaz that is godlike is the introduction and how he greets his people. In verse 4, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. That's the city of David, by the way, which would be very closely related to God. Future city of David, I should say. David hasn't been born yet. Ruth and Boaz are David's great-grandparents or somewhere in his ancestry, so keep that in mind. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, may the Lord bless you. That's his introduction. When Boaz enters the scene, we have heard some good things about him. He's a wealthy man, he's a relative, he's someone who's reliable, supposedly. But as you actually get to examine the man himself, then you have to ask, does he live up to the expectations people have put on him? And the answer for Boaz is, well, absolutely he does. He is fantastic. He opens the conversation. The first thing that he says is focused around God. He opens his conversation by pointing people to God. He's looking after those who are serving him, those who are his workers, who are working underneath him. He opens up by saying, hey, make sure you remember who God is. May the Lord be with you. It's not, he doesn't come in and say, good morning, how's it going? Hope you're doing okay. He says, God bless you all. And they respond likewise, and may the Lord bless you as well. And so you can see the influence that he has on people. You can see that he is proclaiming the name of God. He cares about the name of God. He's refocusing on the name of God. He's centering that in his life, but also in the life of his workers. And his workers respond likewise. It's like you read through that seems like something they've rehearsed. It seems like something that they do every morning, because it probably is. When Boaz shows up on the scene, he glorifies God. He focuses his idea, his mental image on God, and greets people in the name of the Lord. He enshrines, or he enthrones God at the center of the discussion as soon as he enters. Doesn't God do that? It's a little bit different, because God is, of course, in his conversations, God is representing himself and Boaz is representing God. So it is a little bit different from that perspective. But doesn't God do that same kind of thing? When God goes to have a conversation with people, what does he do? Does he just show up and say, hey, good morning, let's chat? Or does he say, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. That's Exodus chapter 20. See, when God enters into a conversation, he wants his people to be focused. He wants his people to know who they're working for, and ultimately to just have God in mind. He wants them to be thinking about his glory. His glory is our major concern. And so God shows up, and he shows up in his might. He shows up in his splendor, and he shows up talking about the glory of God. That's what you should be focused on. Hey, this is the important thing. Make sure that your lives are built around the thing that is important and not just this physical little work stuff that you're doing. When God comes in to talk to people, he talks about himself to remind us of who he is and how great he is. When Boaz comes in to talk to people, he talks about God to remind them of who God is and how great God is. That's the focus, the same kind of focus that God has. Boaz is concerned with recentering his workers on what's right and what's important and making sure that they have the proper focus in their minds. So does God. It's a very interesting introduction. Most people would just say, hey, how's it going? But Boaz makes sure that God is part of the conversation. Well, you see God in him greeting the workers. You also see God in the second thing from Boaz, which is he is welcoming those who are, shall we say, lost or something like that, verses 5 through 9. When Boaz arrives at his field, he's talking with his workers, and there are two aspects to this point of welcoming those who are lost, or those who are the foreigner, really, is who Ruth is. Two aspects to this. Number one, he is involved with his people enough, and number two, he is involved beyond his people. First, he is involved with his people enough to know who they are and to know when someone new shows up. Boaz knows his own people. So he's talking to his servants, and he says in verse 5, he said to his servant in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Boaz has a crowd of men who are working for him, and there are a bunch of other women who are coming to work in his fields as well and coming to benefit from the fields. And yet, even among all that, Boaz is able to tell, hey, so there's somebody new here today. Who is this? What's her story? He is able to tell that she exists, and he's actually interested in knowing what her story is and who she is and, what's the situation here? How can I help in this situation? He's very welcoming to someone who is new to this. When you think about masters and slaves today, or maybe you think about masters and slaves throughout history, or you think like employers and employees today, a lot of times, especially, you get a big company together, the guy at the top really doesn't know or care about anyone who's underneath them. The people at the bottom interact with someone who's a rung higher than they are, and those people interact with in a couple rungs of their rank. The guys at the top interact with maybe the people right beneath them and maybe another set of people, but not really anybody else. Boaz is the master of this whole area, and Boaz says, I don't know who this random servant lady is. What's her story? How can I help her? And how can I be a benefit there? He not only notices her, he asks after her. No, not many masters care about the lowly servant, but Boaz does. And when he asks, you have to notice his introduction, or her introduction to him, rather. The servant says, in verse 6, the servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And you need to think about that statement, because she's the young Moabite woman who came with Naomi from the land of Moab. Okay. Why did you have to say she's a Moabite woman from the land of Moab? Why did you say it like that? Couldn't you have just said she's a Moabitess? Or couldn't you just say, oh, she's from the land of Moab? But you have to say, she's a Moabitess from Moab. She's a foreigner of foreigners. She is a Gentile of Gentiles. She's a heathen of heathens. She has kind of a reputation, a little bit, and it's not a great one. Moab and the heathens in general, all these other nations that are coming in, especially in the Judges time period when these nations are coming in and oppressing Israel and doing terrible things to them. Well, wasn't Eglon the king of Moab that Ehud had to kill? I mean, there's a reputation with this. The servant is, I think, in essence, saying, she's kind of sus, as kids would say like 6 years ago. I don't think we should trust her, or I don't really know about her. She seems kind of suspect or untrustworthy, or whatever the complaint is. She's one of those Moabites. You may not want to hang around her, especially someone like Boaz, who is powerful and influential, but also righteous. You don't want to, you don't want to associate yourself with someone who is evil or someone who is unclean. Get yourself unclean. You don't want to have anything to do with that. You don't want anyone to start looking at your reputation and saying, that's a little bit suspect of what you've done and who you've decided to spend time with. Boaz especially, hey, you might want to be careful hanging around this one. I think that's what the servant is saying. And Boaz immediately goes and talks to her. Regardless of the warning, if there is a warning, I think there is, Boaz goes anyway. Boaz is, he sees someone who is foreign. He sees someone who is a heathen. He sees a Gentile, and he starts to welcome her in. Isn't that just like what God does? Doesn't God care about the people who are far away, those who are far away from him, those who are estranged, those who are sinners, even tax collectors and sinners? Who did Jesus spend all his time with? Was the people who were far away from God. It's not those who are well who need the physician, it's those who are sick. It's not those who are at the location that need the GPS. It's those who are far away and don't even know exactly where they're going. Boaz reaches out to her. She may be a Gentile of Gentiles, a heathen of heathens, but I can reach out to her. And so he does just that. Just like God, even those who are distant, even those who are sinners are welcome before God if they are willing to be there. And so he reaches out to her and tries to influence her. He provides for everything that she needs. He even says, hey, don't go away from here. I've got a good field. There's more than enough for you. Let's make sure you're taken care of. You can stay here in this area. He provides for her needs, even though she doesn't know God. She's not an Israelite. She is a heathen. She is strange. She is new to this place. But he provides for her, and he makes sure that she's taken care of, just like God does, even for those who are sinners. If you're, poking around the things of God, well, God will provide you an opportunity to hear him out and to experience more and more of his presence. The third thing Boaz does, as he's talking to Ruth, is you see him actually pray for her. Verses 11 and 12 are very clear on this. Ruth says in verse 10, basically, why are you being nice to me? I am a foreigner. Even she recognizes she doesn't deserve any of this. She doesn't deserve the grace that he's giving, but he's giving grace anyway. Why are you doing this? Boaz says in verse 11, all that you've done for your mother-in-law, after the death of your husband, has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to the people you did not previously know. In other words, I know you're curious about Israel and about God. I know what you've sacrificed for this. So, verse 12, this is important. It'll come back later. May the Lord reward your work, and may your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz is praying for her. Not only is he aware of Ruth's work, that's impressive in its own right. You would think that the famous business owner and landowner and the rich guy, you'd think he had better things to do or more important things to do than spend time researching Ruth's background, but he doesn't. And he spends time on her. He wants to understand her. He wants to know her. And as soon as he finds out that it's her, oh, okay, and he goes to help her. And so you see that he's been investing in this a little bit. Not only is he aware of Ruth's work, he even then calls on God to come down and bless it. He asks God to provide for her, using this interesting phraseology. You've come to take refuge under the wings of God. And basically just may he continue to provide that for you. That's going to come back later. God is called in to continue providing for Ruth and for Naomi. God is called in. Boaz is praying on behalf of the stranger and the person who doesn't even know who God is. Boaz is advocating for her. Ruth doesn't know how to pray to God. She doesn't know what God to pray to. She doesn't have a connection with this God. But Boaz is using his connection with God to maybe help facilitate Ruth's connection with God and her provision through it. It's quite interesting. Not only is Boaz praying for their provision, though, he's also the one who's providing it. And that's a point we're going to make a little bit later on, again, because Boaz is the one who is fulfilling this role right now. He says, may God continue to provide for you. But who's the one who's providing for them? I mean, Ruth is working in Boaz's field because Boaz said back in verse 11, or back in verse 8, not 11, come to my field and work in my field and stay in my field. That's what will provide for you. Boaz is saying, may God provide for you, and then he's helping facilitate that and make it happen. Boaz prays, and Boaz acts in accordance with his prayer. One of the points I tried to make when talking about the Sermon on the Mount and how Christians should pray in Matthew 6 is we shouldn't be praying for things that we're not willing to actually do. If you're praying for mercy, but you're not willing to give mercy, if you're praying for forgiveness, but you're not willing to forgive, God's not going to listen to it. If you pray for food, but you're not willing to work for anything, why would God honor that? If you're praying for God to help you navigate a situation with somebody else, a difficult, complicated situation, but then you don't put in any effort to make reconciliation with the person, why would God listen to something like that? If you're going to pray that God provide for someone, are you really then allowed to just not provide for anyone? God, you've given refuge. You've spread your wings and given refuge to people. Please provide for Ruth. as I keep providing for her. Boaz is not just praying, he's not just saying, go in peace, be warmed and filled. He's saying, may God provide, and God will provide through Boaz. It's important that Boaz acts in accordance with his prayer. And that is just like God. It's not only that God wishes good upon us, upon his people, God actually is the one who provides it. God prays, and then God also is the one who continues to answer it. Sometimes he answers it through people. Sometimes he answers it through random chance. Sometimes he answers it through, all sorts of different means by which it is answered, but God does wish good on us. He does pray for us. He intercedes for us, and then good things happen because of it. Isn't that just the same way that God interacts with people? He prays for her and makes sure that her needs are seen to. The fourth thing that you see about Boaz is he actively goes and serves Ruth. Verses 14, 15, and 16 make that point very clear. When they get around to the mealtime, so Ruth works quite a bit in the morning, and they get around to the mealtime, Boaz says to her, verse 14, "Come here so that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. When she got up to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also, you are to purposefully slip out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it so that she may glean, and do not rebuke her." Well, isn't that interesting? When you look at Ruth, Ruth is a servant, and Boaz is the master. He's the master of everyone in his field, including Ruth and all of his own servants. He's the one who owns the property. He's the one who, maybe he owns the people, or maybe he just employs them, but he's the one who provides for them. Either way, whichever way you take it to be, or whichever way you look at it, he's the one in charge. He provides for them. He's the one who gives to them. What do you expect out of a master when the slaves come in from the field? Even Jesus makes this point later on in the Gospels as he's teaching. He says, what do slaves do? Do slaves come in and get served by the master? No, of course not. Slaves come in and they serve the master, and then after the master is served, they can have some things for themselves. But that's not how Boaz works. What kind of master is Boaz? The servants are the ones who are supposed to serve, and yet Boaz says, "Hey, Ruth, it's okay for you to eat with us." And not only is it okay, he's the one who's getting her food and serving her and making sure that all of her needs are met. Not only that, when she gets up, when she has enough, she gets up and goes out to work away from the table, and Boaz calls his servants back and says, make sure that you provide for her. Make sure that you throw out extra for her. Make sure that even if she is in the wrong place, don't correct her, just give her a little bit extra. Make sure that she is given everything she needs. He serves her actively at the table, and he serves her passively through the blessing of giving her some extra grain. You can see how important it is to her to him that she is provided for. You can also see how important it is to him that his people provide for her, to make sure that every instance in which there could be a problem is taken care of. For Boaz, he makes sure it's not just himself who's doing all the work. He's making sure to give it to the people around him, the servants that he has, for them to do the work and also help her out. It reminds me of when God provides. God sometimes provides by himself very directly, straight to us. Sometimes he sends out angels to help. Sometimes he sends out angels to serve. He'll come before Daniel and he'll reveal something to Daniel, or he'll send a messenger, or he'll say, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. And then Daniel has help either way. God will be involved actively, or God will be involved passively, but either way, she is taken care of. God provides for his people. Even though she is a heathen, even though she doesn't really understand God, even though she is far away from him, even though she's not an Israelite, God still provides for her. Boaz still provides for her, and it's a great picture of that. God does not merely provide for human beings once they give their lives to him as Christians. God actually just provides for people in a blanket way. He gives people the air to breathe. That's a pretty incredible blessing that he gives. And he just gives that for free. People who are coming around and thinking about him and looking for him, yes, he will bless them. He will make sure they have what they need to keep on searching, to keep on finding, to keep on existing and figuring out who he is so that they can come to a faith of their own. Yes, Boaz serves Ruth, but just in the same way, God serves us. It's a really cool reflection when you think about Boaz and all these things that he's doing for her. A quick recap. Boaz greets the workers in a glorious way by putting God at the forefront. Boaz welcomes those who are lost by calling Ruth in, inquiring about her, and providing for her. Boaz prays for her to make sure that God sees her, to make sure that God is aware that she has needs, and he even helps to fill those needs as well. Boaz also serves her actively and passively, making sure that everything she does is that she's looked after in every way. The fifth idea is Boaz actually answers prayers. And we kind of talked about this because in chapter 2 and verse 12, may the Lord reward your work, may your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, even as Boaz is the one who's providing for her. And so he's kind of the fulfillment of that prayer. You also see him answering prayers very directly in chapter 3. Ruth chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. There's this weird interaction that is, I guess, controversial because I'm not sure that people really understand exactly what's going on. There's this moment where Boaz is sleeping on the threshing floor and Ruth approaches him and uncovers his feet. Some people think this is it's a sexual thing that Ruth is doing towards Boaz. Some people think that Naomi is commanding Ruth to do a sexual thing and Ruth refuses to do it. Some people think Naomi is commanding Ruth to do a sexual thing and Ruth doesn't understand that. It's like a cultural disconnect between the two nations, and so she just doesn't. It's not that she didn't mean to, it's just she had no idea what Naomi was actually asking for. Some people think it's a perfectly innocent thing that Ruth came up with or that Naomi came up with, and that it's just like a way to appeal. I have no idea. Personally, I think I don't have a high opinion of Naomi, so I think Naomi probably meant it as an evil thing, and Ruth didn't understand because she's actually nice and pretty good and just kind of innocent or maybe even naive like that. That's my personal opinion on it, but I don't really know. I can't say definitively which it is. The point is, the point I'm approaching here in verses 9 and 10 doesn't really have anything to do with that. The point is, when she comes to Boaz, it's interesting to see what she actually asks for. In verse 8, he wakes up. Oh, there's this woman lying at his feet. He's a little bit confused. Chapter 3, verse 9, he, that is Boaz, said, "Who are you?" And she, who is Ruth, answered, "I am Ruth, your slave. Now spread your garment over your slave, for you are a redeemer." That's very important. In verse 10, he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You've shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich." In other words, you're not really going into this for like a husband. You're going into this to try and provide for yourself and especially your mother-in-law, Naomi, I believe is what he's hinting at there. But the point, you have to zoom in on verse 9 with this phrase, "Spread your garment over your slave, for you are a redeemer." And then Boaz says, okay, sure, right, I'll do that. May you be blessed of the Lord. And ultimately, yes, don't be afraid, verse 11, I'll do whatever you say. So you have Boaz answering her request, but her request is very interesting because it's the same request that actually he prayed for in chapter 2, in verse 12, when he says, "May your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." That idea is, I've been told, I'm not like a Hebrew scholar or anything, but I've been told that idea of under his wings you've come to take refuge is the idea of asking God to spread his wings over Ruth. And what she asks is not, I mean, we understand it as spread your garment or like spread your cloak over me. But what's actually being asked is spread your wings over me. Chapter 3 and verse 9. Boaz prays for God to spread his wings over Ruth. Chapter 2 and verse 12. Ruth prays to Boaz for Boaz to spread his wings over her. Chapter 3 and verse 9. And Boaz says, okay. It's very directly a callback to what he previously said. He had said, God will provide for you, and now she's asking him to provide for her. She doesn't really understand God at this point, I don't think. She's a Moabite, right? She doesn't have really experience with this. She doesn't know who the God of Israel is, and she's coming around to kind of an understanding, or at least she will come around to an understanding, but it takes a little bit. In the meantime, she knows that Boaz has provided. She can see, as much as Boaz is praying for God to cover her and take care of her and everything, she sees that Boaz has covered her and taken care of her and everything. She can see God in the character of Boaz as he's living. And so she prays the same thing to Boaz as he prays to God, which is, make sure, cover me and make sure I am provided for. There's something to be said for this. In Boaz's case, if you pray, make sure you're willing to act accordingly. God, please provide for this person. Are you willing to provide anything for that person? That's a good question to ask, and that's something that you really need to contemplate and grapple with. But Ruth doesn't know where to go. She can't provide for herself, and so she goes to the one who is available and able and responsive, just like we go to God and ask him for help as well. We cannot save ourselves. We cannot provide for ourselves. We go to the Lord and say, spread your wings over us, because you are a redeemer. That's the same appeal. Ruth appealed that for her benefit, and we also pray for our benefit as well. When you pray to God to forgive you, when you pray to God to help you through a situation, when you pray to God because there's something tough going on in life, it's that same kind of approach. And Boaz, just like God, answers it and says yes. The sixth thing that you see in Boaz is he adopts her. This is specifically called out. It's actually used 3 times. I'm just bringing it up here because this is the completion of it. In chapter 2, in verse 8, Boaz says to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter, don't go glean in another field." The use of daughter is kind of just, a familial term to say, hey, we're family, we're related, we're linked here, so don't worry about that. But it's also very specific, I think, because especially as you get here, he is taking on the role of the father for a child. He is taking on the role of the provider. He's taking on the role of the man of the house who is making sure that the children under him have enough that they are not in need anymore. He uses the idea of her being his daughter in chapter 2, verse 8. He uses it in chapter 3, verse 10. "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter." And in chapter 3, verse 11, "So now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you say." When Jesus is talking, even in the Sermon on the Mount, which one of you has a son who will ask you for an egg and you'll give him a snake instead? Or he'll ask you for something good and you'll give him something terrible instead. Which one of you is like Boaz, who has a daughter, metaphorically, come up to him and ask him for something? Which one of you is not going to say, "Hey, I will do whatever you need"? He is adopting her as a child to take care of her like a father takes care of children. She is family now. She's brought into the family. She is going to be taken care of in a permanent kind of way. It started even when she was a long way off. He was willing to be generous and throw out this term of daughter, but now, especially that she's entering into a close kind of appeal, yes, your family. Yes, it's okay. Don't worry. Don't be afraid. Everything will work out. Some people may think that this is a little bit odd, given that, especially because Ruth and Boaz will end up married later, and so, it's kind of weird to call her his daughter. Well, it's also a little bit weird that Boaz is quite a bit older than Ruth is. One of the reasons he says in chapter 3, verse 10, "You've shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men." Because Boaz is not a young man. He is a little bit older. I don't know the age discrepancy, but he is a little bit older. So, yes, there's plenty about the story that seems like it's weird. Keep in mind, this was also 3,000 years ago, a little bit older, a little bit more than 3,000 years ago, in a very different area of the world, in very different culture and practice. So it's not actually that weird, considering all the ramifications of the time frame around them. regardless, that's not really the point of the story. The point is, hey, he has brought her in like she is family to take care of her. This is those who appeal to God for protection do have this as well. We will be brought into his family. When we ask God, when we say, look, I cannot provide for myself, can you provide for me? Can you take care of me? God says yes, because you are family. And it's a very important distinction. It's actually a distinction that's brought up in Galatians chapter 4 in the New Testament. Paul is writing, and he's talking about under the old law, you used to have this relationship with God. You used to be a slave of God, but now you are no longer slaves. You are sons or children, right? And if you are sons, then you are also heirs according to the promise, which is a really fascinating parallel when you think about Ruth. Ruth comes in as a servant. She comes in as a slave. She is beholden to Boaz. Boaz is employing her. He is making her work and then paying her for her work, but she is working for him. She is just a slave, but by the end of the story, she becomes like a daughter. She becomes provided for, and actually by the end of the story, they become married, and it's a very different relationship than just slavery. In the Old Testament, you were slaves to God. In the New Testament, you are children of God. Ruth begins her journey as a slave to Boaz, but here she's a child of Boaz, and even later on, she becomes even closer to him later. This idea is really powerful. You are my daughter. It's this idea of adoption, and adoption is a fantastic process because it means you can come from anywhere and still end up as a child. It means you can come from, any part of the earth, and if you are adopted by a certain family, you become a part of that family. It doesn't matter that you're a Moabitess from Moab. It doesn't matter that you're a Gentile of Gentiles. It doesn't really matter that you're a heathen of heathens. You'll learn. You know who God is. You're starting to know who God is. And so this idea of adoption is bringing her in and making her one of the family, making her one of God's people. And that's really important as you go forward. Well, that's number 6, is that he adopts her, just like God adopts us as his children, and if children, also heirs of the things of God. The 7th and final thing you see about Boaz is this concept of redeemer. Verse 9, Ruth brings it up. You are a redeemer. Verse 12 and 13 is primarily where this is addressed. Look, although it is true that I am a redeemer, there is also a redeemer more closely related than I, so remain this night, and when the morning comes, if he will redeem you, then good, let him redeem you, but if he doesn't wish to redeem you, I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Now lie down until the morning. All of chapter 4 is really about this conflict, and so there is a physical complication here where there is another family member who is technically closer to like Ruth and Naomi. So since he's closer, he's the one who has the right to redeem her, and Boaz can't quite do it. This is not a perfect parallel. Nothing is a perfect parallel to God and man. The relationship between God and man can be expressed as parent and child. It can be expressed as husband and wife. It can be expressed as servant and master. None of those is a perfect version of what it is. They're all just kind of like, this is a general idea of some aspects of how God deals with human beings, but none of those are going to be, of course, perfect representations. Here, this is not a perfect representation because Boaz can't just up and redeem her. He has to wait and go through a different process to see if somebody else will redeem her. And only when that man fails does Boaz step in and redeem her. But zoom out and look at the point, right? The overarching point that's being made is not, hey, God has difficulty in redeeming people. It is, Boaz is very clear, you will be redeemed. Boaz says, he can redeem you or I will redeem you. If he doesn't, I will. There is no point at which Ruth is not going to be redeemed. When you appeal to God, when you are adopted into his family, there is no point at which you are not going to be redeemed. Here, there's a technical difference between being redeemed by John Doe, the family member. Go read the net translation if that's an odd reference, or Boaz. It doesn't really matter who you're redeemed by. It just means you're redeemed, right? That's the focus. Ultimately, Ruth understands that working in Boaz's field is great, and being around Boaz is pretty cool, and like getting to benefit in that way is very nice. But that's not a permanent solution. People can be around church, and that's pretty cool. People can be around Christians, and that can be a benefit to them. But unless you are a Christian, that's not a permanent solution. Like, you're not actually finding a solution. You're not actually getting anywhere. If you are around God but not fully and completely dedicated to Him, you're missing something. Ruth needs more than the temporary deal of working in the field for the moment. It's not going to last. She needs that permanent solution, so she goes to the one who can provide it for her. And Boaz steps in. When in the next chapter, the man in question comes around, Boaz chats with the man. The man says, "No, I don't want to redeem her." And Boaz says, "Fine, then I will." Immediately. As soon as he says, in verse 6, the Redeemer said, "I can't redeem it for myself, otherwise I'd jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You can have my right of redemption since I cannot redeem it." And Boaz immediately says, "Yes." Verse 9, "You are witnesses today. I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon." Those are Naomi's sons, one of which was Ruth's original husband. "Furthermore, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up in the name of the deceased on his inheritance," etc., etc., just to make sure all these things are in place. When this other man, when that deal falls through, God is always there as the Redeemer. He can redeem. Nothing will get in his way. Other people may stand up and they may try and help you out, but ultimately, if and when they fail, God will be the one to redeem. Put your hope in Boaz. Put your hope in God. He's the one who can make it work, and nobody else can. Temporary peace is welcome. Temporary peace might be very nice, but it's no solution. It's no real concrete solution for what's ultimately coming. You need the permanence of the Redeemer. You need the Redeemer to come in. You have to go to the Redeemer and beg him to throw his cloak over you to make sure you are provided for. Boaz provides that for Ruth, a Gentile who doesn't deserve anything and doesn't even really know who God is. And God provides it for us, the heathens who don't really deserve anything at all. And honestly, a lot of us are just stumbling around in the dark. We're trying to find out who God is. Maybe we have some part of an image in our head, but we can't fully grasp him. Of course you can't fully grasp him. He's God. As soon as you think you've grasped onto the idea of God, you've missed something massive, because God is infinite. You cannot fully understand him. But God's willing to give grace anyway. God's willing to redeem anyway. God's willing to adopt anyway. God is willing to send his servants to serve you anyway. God's willing to take care of you regardless, if you are willing to ask him for his help. If you're willing to show up in his field and do some work. If you're willing to admit that you are weak and you cannot provide for yourself, God can do it for you. And it's fascinating to see it play out when you look at the characters of Ruth and Boaz and how they interacted in the human sphere. Ruth is a great woman, but she's not ultimately just a great woman. She's a great representation of where we are at as human beings living on this world. Boaz is a great man, but he's not ultimately just a great man. He's a great representation of who God is in his omniscience and power and authority and all these things. He's so far above, and yet he's willing to come down and serve that which is so unimportant, the Ruths of the world. Boaz is not just a great man, he is a man who is like God. And as you look at Boaz, you can see God. You can see how God interacts with people. If you want a picture of God saving us, if you want to know what that looks like and how that relationship works out, Ruth and Boaz actually model it fairly well. God would take notice of you, even when you are far away, like Boaz does with Ruth. Hey, she's new here. I'll help her out. God will take notice of you. God is willing. God is wanting to help and provide for you. He wants to save you. So please let him do so. Boaz is a man who is very much like God. Ruth is a woman who is very much like us. And together they form a great picture of how God interacts with his people. It's very fascinating. And hopefully you benefit from learning a little bit about that. I think that's where we'll call it here. On Wednesday, there's a class on something or other. I think it's Psalms this week, but I'm so off on... I'm slightly ahead on recording those, so I'm not exactly sure. Class maybe on Psalms. And then on Friday, I need to talk about the next part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is do not worry, and everything that comes along with that. So I'll see you then.